Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You're listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks, and we are hopefully changing the way that we listen to the world. Now, we are over broadcasting on my YouTube channel, which has the same name as the show, Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. So if you'd like to join me over there, we do have a chat room. And I swear I'm trying to get better at really paying attention to that to be able to multitask and answer some of your questions and respond to what's going on. And I kind of purposefully today kind of did a few less notes than I usually do because I know I just want to pack everything into a show. I do. I just want to pack everything into it. And it's just not necessary. So hopefully I can back off a little bit. And if you have some questions about what's going on or you want to interact with some of the material we're talking about today, we can do that. So thanks for coming in. And those of you who are early, thank you for being here. I see Leslie and James. Thanks for coming on in. And anybody else who wants to join us over in the chat, please do that over on YouTube. All right. Well, this is August 18th, 2026. And on today's show, we are going to explore the new solar cycle, which is the sun moving into Virgo on Saturday evening. That's going to be August 22nd. Now, of course, there's other things going on this week. In fact, we had a lot of, planetary connections yesterday. So it'd be interesting just to see what was going on for you. And as we look at the week ahead, I must admit, even though we are in the waxing part of the lunar cycle, which means the light is building every day, every night, towards that full moon, which is next week, it feels a little to me like the waning part of the cycle. And I think the reason is because we have got a Scorpio moon, which is very introverted. And the Scorpio moon of today and tomorrow, those are times when, don't be surprised if you just kind of you want to withdraw a little bit, or you just want to think some things out. You're trying to figure some things out. You're trying to understand. And that to me somehow seems, like the energy that we often have towards the end of a lunar cycle, but it's not. It's right now. But, that Scorpio moon can be what I consider, I don't want to say heavy, but it's just when we tend to be a little more introspective than usual. So if all of a sudden you're going, whoa, where is that energy coming from? It's probably coming from the Scorpio. And this is a little kind of, heads up to what we're going to be talking about with Virgo too. Remember, with so many planets now, especially those four outer planets, sitting in the element of fire, which is willfulness, and sitting in air, which is all communication. Those two feed off each other and make the pace of our lives really speed up. But the water and the earth signs, and of course, Scorpio's water and Virgo is earth, they're kind of sitting there going, whoa, slow down. Where are we going here? And so it is true. I'm not going to say that Scorpios or that Virgo in general, that they're going to have all these issues with those planets, but just recognize these are natural cycles. And we have for years had a lot of earth and water energy, and now that has switched. So it is true that some of these signs, they're going to be very protective in a sense of their particular energy. And they're not going to particularly like being pushed by the fire or being provoked by some of that air energy that is in the universe. So just recognize that's true, but also give it a purpose in your life. Don't give it the purpose that, oh, I've got to just live through this. I've got to live through the next couple of days, get through this water moon, or got to just live through this particular cycle. Now, there are certainly times when we do that. We just go, okay, if I can just get through this. But, give it a purpose. What is it that I can learn? And or like, for instance, with this particular Scorpio moon, the Scorpio moons are always introverted, I think, but this one is particularly so. So give yourself that opportunity. Say, hey, you know what? I had all these things on my agenda, but now I'm just not feeling like that. Maybe I do need to just meditate today, or just, do something internal, or just even relax, take a nap, whatever it is. If you're feeling that way today and tomorrow, just allow that to be. Because one thing we're going to learn about Virgo and the sun in Virgo is it's about being self-determined, being willing to just say, this is my pace, this is my life. And I know sometimes I have to accommodate, I have to speed up, or I have to do things a little bit differently. But it's about knowing who you are, your preferences, your desires, and not being selfish in terms of saying everything's got to be for me, but just recognizing how you want to respond to the energy around you, and not being like this little bouncing ball just responding to everything as it comes along. You know, I think we'd all probably be a little bit happier if we just said, I'm giving this energy a purpose in my life. And the purpose is going to be that I'm going to relax today, or I'm going to understand myself a little bit better, that sort of thing. So, I'm just telling you, there are some things going on this week, especially with the moon, and just, feel what you feel, but also go and check out Mark's Power Peak. That's the online newsletter that you can subscribe to for free. And every week I write a column. It's called The Week Ahead, and there are dailies. And those dailies are going to tell you exactly where the moon is. And if there's something in particular that I think is important that's going to go on, then I'm going to mention it. And I'm just going to give you my take on how that energy is likely to unfold. Now, for you, it may not at all, but at least, I feel like we're always in the right place at the right time. When we're attracted to something, then it is there for us in our life. So if you say, hey, I just didn't even feel like reading it this week, well, then maybe it wasn't meant for you. And other times you go, yeah, I really want to check that out. Or, hey, it's Wednesday, what's going on? So go check out Mark's Power Peak. And if you're not a subscriber, you can find it on one2listen.com. You'll see a link. And also at one2house.com. All right. All right. So enough of that. As we look at this week, I want to remind you that we've got just a little over 5 days to wish our Leo friends and family happy birthday. And of course, I mention that because of all the signs. Trust me when I say they're going to notice if you've given them a tribute, if you acknowledge their birthday, or if you didn't. They're going to be the one who say, you missed my birthday, or you didn't think of me. Now, they may not say it to you, but remember, this is the sign of royalty. This is the sign of hierarchies. And so Leo notices if you give them appreciation. So if in the back of your mind, you're going, oh, yeah, I got some, Leo family. I got some Leo friends. And boy, I better get cracking. Well, technically, we have until Saturday evening, the 22nd, before the sun moves. Now, not that you can't do it after that, but I'm just reminding you that this week we're basically under that Leo sun. But we won't be going into the weekend and next week and the next month. So the sun's entry into this very analytical and pragmatic Virgo is not officially the start of autumn. And I say that because it always feels that way nevertheless. This is the time of year when in many countries, people go back to school. The summer is, the days are finally getting a little bit cooler and people go back to school. In fact, I know, anymore, I'm hearing of kids going back to school in early August. And I'm always kind of surprised because it seems like such a September thing. But it's definitely a Virgo thing, that it is back to school season. So even though we're not in fall yet, but we are just saying goodbye to the vacation vibes of summer. And instead, we're moving towards that more pragmatic energy of Virgo. And I like to think of it as we're exchanging those board shorts and flip-flops and outdoor concerts for things like getting new office supplies and school supplies and computer backpacks and, checking into the latest tech gadgets. And of course, we're thinking about things like taking a weekend workshop or going to a seminar, signing up for something. Because here again, since it's kind of that back to school vibe, what happens is even adults that are looking to take a class, even, if it's a cooking class or it's a meditation class, so many things start off in the sign of Virgo. That's where those classes are going to begin. They begin in the fall under the sign of Virgo. And in fact, I often think, there's two times of the year that are good for making resolutions, like literally New Year's resolutions. I find that people obviously are doing that in December and January because the year is changing. But the other time I find people really doing that is in the fall. And once again, I'm going to give credit to Virgo for doing that. This is a sign that is ruled by the planet Mercury, which is the planet of thinking and communication and making connections. And it's sort of like Virgo just kind of steps up, and I like to think she puts a fresh and eager face on to things like accuracy and efficiency and everyday practicality, because she can make rational thinking and expertise and sticking to the rules suddenly look like a good thing, look very sexy. So this is the sign that can really elevate that sense of precision and orderliness and cleanliness to higher levels. And I kind of stress that cleanliness because, of course, Virgo gets that reputation for being so picky and so precise and so perfectionistic. Now, she is, but the one thing I want to remind you of, it's very interesting. Sometimes if you know somebody with Virgo, lots of Virgo, or, just even a few planets there, yeah, you might go into their home and everything just seems perfect. But you can see exactly the opposite too. And in some ways, that would surprise me when I would meet a Virgo, that it just seemed like everything was a mess. But you know what I realized? They knew exactly where everything was. It was an order or a mess that they had created, and they knew exactly how to operate within that structure. So I think they may be equally structured. It just doesn't look exactly like what we would think it would. So keep that in mind. It's not like you go in and go, okay, you're not acting very Virgo. So let's look at the mythology. In the mythology of Virgo, and remember in astrology, almost every sign, and the planets too, but the different signs, they may have multiple myths that are associated with them. The one we're going to talk about today is about the goddess Astraea. She was a goddess, and here again, just kind of picture, here's the story. There's a lot of gods and goddesses, and they're always intermingling with humans, right? And it's an age of peace and harmony. Lord knows when that was exactly, but in any case, that's how the story goes. So over time, the world became greedy and ugly and competitive and warring. Now, can you imagine that really happening, right? Now, all the gods decided that they were going to just abandon mankind. They were kind of tired of it. This wasn't fun anymore. They didn't like the interaction. But Astraea was the one god that stayed. And the reason she stayed is because of her devotion to being of service. She is idealistic. And that's something I think, too, we forget when we think about Virgo. She does things, she's motivated by being an idealist. So she said, there's still something left. I can mentor. I can bring a different level even to this greedy, ugly, competitive world. So she stayed longer than all the other gods. And the story goes that by the time she left, she was rewarded by being placed in the constellation of Virgo. So Virgo has this, remember, she is what we call a mutable sign, like Pisces and Gemini and Sag. They always have two sides. But the two sides, that can be multi-level too. I mean, two of the sides almost always have to do with balancing being a human with being divine, but it can also be other things as well, mortal versus immortal. And in the case of Virgo, what you've got is this paradoxical combination of sexuality. This is earth. This is sensuous. Sexuality, fertility, but being balanced against that idealistic idea, that pure idea that we have called virginity. So Virgo is fertile earth mother and sanctified virgin. It's a duality of purity and corruption. And here's where I never let a discussion of Virgo go without really bringing up the idea that I think The virgin in our culture is different than sometimes the real origin of the word, especially when we think about Virgo, because Virgo is more like the temple virgins who were not necessarily celibate. In fact, it wasn't about being celibate sexually, it was about having the right to be self determined. You got to choose your partner. You got to decide how to use your sexuality. Now, see, that's a whole different story. Saying that I'm in charge, I have the authority, I'm self determined. And those are words, those are concepts that are really good to associate with Virgo and to just keep those in mind. This is about being self determined, which kind of goes back to what I was saying about this time period of Virgo will struggle a little bit with that fire and air energy, just a little bit saying, no, I'm setting the pace. So with Virgo, she needs to embrace the opposites, embrace mortality versus divinity and spirituality versus materialism. That is kind of, the continuum that we're working with. And I would say, if you want to remember one thing about Virgo, it might be that her lessons and dilemmas always involve living in an imperfect world. And think about that. Some people are obviously a lot more idealistic than others, but so often that's what it comes down to when we're talking, about life in general, but maybe specifically about Virgo. Idealistic, having this vision of what it could be, but understanding that's not the world we're living in an imperfect world. So that is what Virgo's doing, kind of, embracing that struggle. And I think a good example of that is Mother Teresa. She was born with Sun, Mars, the planet of motivation, and Mercury, all in Virgo. And interestingly, her Chiron, remember we talked about Chiron, the wounded healer, a few weeks ago. Her Chiron is in Pisces, which is exactly opposite the sun. So there again, it's such a dynamic of the practical material world of Earth opposite the water, spirituality. So see, that plays out in her chart in a number of places, including she also has Neptune, the ruler of Pisces, the planet of dreams and spirituality. She's got that in another water sign, in Cancer, being the mother of the world, opposite Saturn, discipline and structure, in very organized Capricorn. So once again, that's why I love astrology. I love looking at how those things play out in a person's chart. And of course, I can probably make some assumptions that may or may not be true. But like I said, when I just think she's a good example of those dynamics of opposition. And here are some of the things that she said. Do not think that love, in order to be genuine, has to be extraordinary. What we need is to love without getting tired. Be faithful in small things, because it is in them that your strength lies. And listen to this too. If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. Now, can't you imagine the goddess Estrella feeling that way or thinking that way? We have forgotten that we belong to each other. And here's another one by Mother Teresa. If you're humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know what you are. And that brings up another characteristic of Virgo, being humble. And also, they're not in anything for the praise. We're coming off of that Leo energy, which Leo very actively seeks approval. That's what they want. They're building an ego. They're building an identity. And whether somebody likes them or is telling them go left, go right, that's very useful to Leo. But when we hit Virgo, the next sign, well, we're saying, you know what? I'm not going to let somebody else's praise or their criticism be a factor in what I'm doing. And here again, don't take it to extremes. I'm not saying you don't listen to people. I'm not saying it doesn't, and I'm not saying that it doesn't hurt. But I'm saying ultimately, Virgo says, I'm not going to let this touch me. All right. So moving on. Virgo is that earth sign. Those are the doers of the zodiac: practical, pragmatic, physical. And as an earth sign, that's it. She's patient and thorough. That's one word with Virgo. They are thorough. They, get in there and they do it till it's right, which is where they get that perfectionistic thing. But they do it until they've tried to appease that sense of idealism. They're realistic and they're structured and they're sensual. It's a mutable sign, as we talked about. The mutable signs, Pisces and Virgo and Sag and Gemini. These are the signs that all have two sides. They're definitely working, in two ways, but they're flexible and they're restless. And they tend to be quickly responsive to new ideas and situations. So that's Virgo too. As much as we may not think so, she really is flexible. Then qualities and characteristics, a few more that we might think about when we think about this kind of energy, is being very thoughtful, but also being reserved. This is a very private sign. So being reserved, being critical, especially being self-critical. I mean, so often that's what Virgo's really doing, is being self-critical. They have this idea about what they should live up to. So even if it sounds like they're criticizing you, and I'm not saying they're not, well, they're really kind of projecting their own sense of not living up to an expectation that they have. They're very discriminating, analytical, very observant, precise, and meticulous. They are also unselfish for the most part, even though, once again, that kind of word, you think, oh, but they're always kind of grabbing their me time. They're always kind of grabbing their, let me, do what I need to do. But you know what? Overall, they're very unselfish. They're looking out for how they can perfect themselves so that they can be in service to the world. So, as a mutable sign, remember, she has two sides. And I think maybe more so than all the other dual signs, those ones I named that are, mutable. This one, it's so obvious. Virgo is so much into, I need my private life. I need to be able to recoup. I need to refresh. I need to recover. I need to focus on something for me. One of the things that she's most interested in, I think, is being a learner and being a student and developing expertise. That's what Virgo wants. They want to really sink their teeth into something. I want to learn this. I really want to know this well. Well, a lot of times the only way you can do that is if you're willing to set that time aside. Like, for instance, let's say you want to play an instrument. Well, you don't just, dream the notes at night. You have to practice and practice and practice. In fact, there's that old joke about a man stopping somebody in New York City and saying, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And the person says, practice, practice, practice. And so that is Virgo. I need to have this time, not only to do my meditations or to write in my journal or to study, a language or whatever it is that I'm doing. The only way I can really be of service to others in the world is if I balance that with my private time. So once again, when we are under the influence of Virgo energy, which here again, we're going into Virgo season. Next week, we're going to see Mercury move into Virgo. I mean, that happens, those planets that stay relatively close to the sun, Mercury and Venus, well, they become kind of the season when we see those three hanging out together and moving towards the zodiac, moving together. So what happens is that we just kind of lean into that. I want to become a student. I want to learn something. Hence the back to school idea. So when we're under that influence, it doesn't matter if you don't have a single planet in Virgo in your chart. And remember too, that we always have an area of our lives that are controlled by Virgo, if you're looking at it astrologically. So we're all under that kind of influence. And so think about, you can look at your chart and go, hey, where does that happen in my particular chart? But you can also just think about it in general. How do some of these things apply to me? Because when Virgo's in service, the other thing is she can do just about everything. She can do the typical, I'm going to go, ladle soup at a shelter. She can be part of a fundraiser for a cause. She can volunteer someplace, or, maybe it's even a political or a social cause that she's volunteering for. She just needs to do something. She sees a need and she wants to be involved. And this is the sign that I also don't want you to let go of the idea of being self determined, because she wants to live by a set of inner ideals. And that's what drives her. It's not getting credit or approval from other people. So, another kind of idea you can think about at this time is just self improvement. And not from the perspective of, I'm not okay, so I got to do something different, but how can I improve myself? What can I do during this time to really look at my habits and my routines, and how can I up my game a little bit? But remember, with Virgo, function is much more important than appearances. And I say that because the appearances might be, oh, she's a perfectionist, everything has to be clean, or everything has to be orderly. But her main goal is for things to be functional. That's what she's going for. Not, I'm doing this because it's going to look good, right? So when we think about this kind of energy, Mercury, Mercury controls things like information technology. And so these people, being very detail oriented, sometimes are really good at the very traditional mental things like accounting or research or inventory control or working in IT, but not necessarily. Virgo has a lot of interests. And here again, she controls the sixth house of the chart. So if you think about some of the sixth house issues and just think about Virgo in general, she is very, very interested in health, but from a very wide ranging birth. Like, for instance, she's very interested in nutrition. You might find her, in fact, I think it's just a classic when you find somebody with Virgo energy working in a health food store, or maybe a restaurant. I always think of, Vitamin Cottage, and I can't remember some of the names now, but, they're the ones that know about the diets and the vitamins and the supplements, because they love it. There's this real innate interest in, I want to know how the body works, and I want to know how these things work with it. But what I find is, even though they might be in something that's very traditionally medical, they're more likely to be in something that's alternative and complementary, like the vitamins and the supplements, or naturopathy, essential oils. And they're really naturals with essential oils because, truthfully, they're good at things like chemistry and biology. They're, again, detail oriented. You might find them in first aid, teaching first aid, or you might say to yourself, I want to take a first aid course. They're also very interested in animals. Now, specifically, the sixth house, we always say, deals with small animals or domesticated animals, pets. So you may find during this time, maybe you want to volunteer at a humane society, or very possibly get involved with animal training. Maybe you've got a pet and you want to teach them some more tricks, or some new behaviors, or that kind of thing. Or maybe you're into dog walking. So there's a wide range of things. It's, like I say, you go all the way from this kind of computer technology to dog walking. There's all kinds of things in between. But remember, Virgo's interested in that integrity. There is idealism here. The integrity of how to live in a physical body, how to live in a world that's relatively flawed from our point of view. And how do we do that? And some of these things, especially with diet and health and routines, remember, she's the queen of routines and habits. Very much so. So those are things to look at during this particular period. Now, in addition, what I find oftentimes, and this comes from the Mercury, being the ruler of Virgo, oftentimes these people have really good hand-eye coordination. So they might be really good with things like stained glass, or carpentry, or furniture design, or drafting, or architecture, needlework, and handcrafts. Maybe they make jewelry, maybe they do all kinds of little art cards, or I shouldn't say little, but you know what things that are very detailed artistic things. Now it's funny, when I was thinking about Virgo the other day, I thought, I wonder if Virgos are ever tattoo artists, because the thing is, I think they'd be excellent at it, excellent, and yet somehow I can't see them doing that. And the only reason I say it is because somehow that seems like, I sometimes picture just something a little bit darker, I don't know. I just wonder if it would just be too messy. If you guys have opinions about that, I'd love to know. Because technically I think she'd be very good, but I'm just not sure that that too many Virgo people would be involved with it, but maybe. So there again, if you're in the chat room, and hey, welcome to those people who have joined us. If you have an opinion about that, let me know. Because I, like I said, it just popped into my head. And I thought, okay, where's that coming from? But I was just kind of, rolling that around. How does that fit into the Virgo energy? And of course, the other thing is tattoos have really evolved over the last, I'd say 40, 50 decades, into something that almost everybody has. And so there again, I need to evolve my attitude about what a tattoo parlor looks like and feels like. It's not some of those places that were depicted in the movies 40 years ago, right? Okay, so generally, think about Virgo as a time that we really make work and study our priorities. Here again, self-improvement. The sun's transit through Virgo is going to last through September 22nd. So this is the time to revamp our personal routines and habits, and to get on board with making healthy choices. So here again, maybe it is time to say, hey, I want to make a resolution. I really want to look at some of my habits and figure out how I can, adjust them a little bit. And it's helpful if first we just observe, what are our habits and routines? And what's their purpose? Why are we doing them? Is it working out for us? And especially anything that has an immediate impact on our health and mental well-being. What is the habit? What is your go-to? And how is that working for you? And remember too that things change so much. And so do you have habits? Do you have like what I call a spiritual tool bag? And a work box, whatever you want to call it, toolbox. And can you pull those things out when the Virgo is feeling, oh my God, this really is a corrupt world, or everything's going to hell in a handbasket, that kind of thing. What tools do you have? And that's Virgo. She, get that toolbox in shape. Do that. That's another good thing. And I would reiterate that once again, I don't want to set us up, but Saturn and Neptune are both in Aries. Aries is willful and it's fast paced. And, Virgo looks over to Aries and goes, oh my God, wait a minute. And I will admit, see, that's an inconjunct. Aries is inconjunct Virgo. So, Virgo's like, I just don't even want to have anything to do with that. Or rather, I just don't know how to incorporate that. But you know what? We don't have the luxury really of just going, okay, I'm not going to pay attention while Saturn and Neptune are in Aries, as long as, there are planets in Virgo. We don't have that luxury. And if you are a Virgo, you don't have that luxury. So understanding how you can stand in your own power, be self-determined despite the pace moving around you being somewhat different, and then being able to use it to your advantage. And of course, we also have Pluto and Uranus. Those two important planets are in air signs, Aquarius and Gemini, respectively. So that also, I think those two kind of push complex and changing agendas. And that's enough to make your head spin. And Virgo's going, wait a minute. So here again, I would say if you are a Virgo, a sun in Virgo, or you've got a lot of Virgo planets, or this is just energy that really appeals to you, and you are feeling a little pushed and shoved and like, what's happening? Then you know what? Just recognize what the energy is that's going on. Okay, now I'm going to go over and I'm going to check into that chat room. And hey, welcome everybody who's coming. And yeah, somebody's saying their kids go back to school. Shelley is saying the Virgo moon says no tattooing. Oh, this Virgo moon says no to tattooing. From a health perspective, it is just a bit too invasive with ink. Just my opinion, no judgment. Oh, you know what, Shelley? And hey, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. I agree. Like I said, when that came into my head, I thought, okay, where's that coming from? But I kind of felt the same way. Um, that it just didn't seem like a good fit, even though I could see a Virgo being really, really good at it. Okay, now Donna is saying my husband has a Virgo moon in the 10th house. His career was working at a TV station, but was 4 years in the Navy. He waited until retired and then got a tattoo of an anchor on his arm. Yeah, see? Like I said, I think it's an evolving thing, but it is interesting that he waited all that time because a lot of people will, that's how it used to be actually, is that a lot of men who, because of course it was only men that went into the military, came out with tattoos. But he obviously wanted that to be a guiding principle for him. Which, see, once again, that's I think that's what Virgo does. Virgo is looking for that idealism. So maybe having a tattoo on his arm, is a reminder. It's a guiding principle. But there again, we don't have to do it with a tattoo. We might find other ways to make our personal philosophies or our guiding principles available to us. But hey, thank you very much for sharing those stories. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's move on. And just here again, this is a transit. To be more assertive in setting your own agenda and pace, to protect your private time and space. This is a good time to start doing that. If you don't already do it, just, tell your family, hey, I need 20 minutes every day to myself or whatever it is. Just protect that space for you. And you can do anything you want. I mean, I'm not saying you have to do something super religious or spiritual or whatever. You could watch TV if you want. You could just kind of relax. You could just kind of offload some stuff in your life. This is a time to be a learner and a student and to really take advantage of resources. So I'd also say, if you're kind of going, hey, what's next for me? You might be looking at classes and learning opportunities. Maybe you do want to do some animal training or animal communication or even animal first aid. There you go. You kind of combine several different areas of Virgo. Maybe you want to learn about essential oils or supplements and vitamins. Or there again, maybe you want to get better with the computer technology. Maybe you want to get onto some of the social apps or the AI and just check out some things and see where that's going to take you. But remember to be self-determined. And I do think for Virgo especially, but for all of us, I think in a quickly fast-paced world, quickly moving, quickly changing, this can be a quiet passage. This can be a time where we don't necessarily slow things down, but for ourselves personally, we do that. We take things at a pace that we can really absorb. And we don't have to let a chaotic world dictate what's going on. And by the way, many of you know I'm a history buff. And the more history I read, and the more, I like to read biographies as well. The more I do that, the more I realize it's just human nature to say, oh my God, everything's speeding up or things are changing so fast. People have been saying that for hundreds of years and quite honestly, probably thousands of years. It's just the way we approach change or our world. Now, that being said, there's no doubt our world is just connected in a way that cavemen could not even imagine. But on the other hand, there's nothing really going on now that, in a sense, has not been there forever in some kind of form. So, you know what? Just be that self-determined Virgo energy at this time and just, figure out what you need to do, your habits, your routines, your way of being in the world. But be flexible and open with that mutable energy to things reversing, to turnarounds and exchanges and figure out how can I create that quiet, calming center within, no matter what's going on the outside. right? Okay, now, I love to talk about people's charts. So we're going to do that with a couple of examples here. We'll see how many we get through. One of the first people I chose was Agatha Christie. She has a sun in Virgo. Now, she also has a lot of Libra energy, and she has Scorpio, which, of course, I think that Venus in Scorpio is probably what gives her the taste for those novels and those mysteries that she writes. Now, here's a couple things she said. It's a curious thought, but it's only when you see people looking ridiculous that you realize just how much you love them. Now, that could be the Libra coming through, but I also thought it was a little Virgo to just kind of recognize that, we can just we have our standards, but we can just, lay them down a little bit. But now this sounds very Virgo. Never tell all you know, not even to the person you know best. And then this one, this is from her autobiography. As life goes on, it becomes tiring to keep up the character you've invented for yourself. And so you relapse into individuality and become more like yourself every day. And then this one I'm saying because this really represents the work ethic of a Virgo. There was a moment when I changed from an amateur to a professional. I assumed the burden of a profession, which is to write even when you don't want to. Don't much like what you're writing and aren't writing particularly well. And we're going to hear one more, I think at the end of the show, I'm going to give you a quote by Stephen King. And it's about, what? Virgos, they set their pace, they set their goal, and they do it. Even when they don't feel like it, they do it because it's their work. It's their commitment. Okay, another person I just think is so fun with Virgo energy is Rachel Ray. The cook, the television, she's got television shows and cookware, and she's got cookbooks, etc. She's got 7 planets in Virgo and also a Virgo rising. So this is a Virgo, Virgo, Virgo. And this is the quote that has always just made me laugh every time I see it. She says, NASA asked me to create meals for the space shuttle. Thai chicken was the favorite. I flew in a fake space shuttle, but I have no desire to go into space after seeing the toilet. Now, that makes me laugh because that is so Virgo. It's sort of like it has to be up to my specifications. And no matter how exciting this is, no matter how incredible this is, I'm not going into space because of the toilet. I just thought, oh my God, that just really always brings a smile to my face when I think about her. Now here's one too. She says, my husband cooks fancier food for himself than I've ever cooked on the air. Half of me is feeling unworthy. Not only am I not a chef, I'm not a better cook than my own husband. Now, what that brings to me is like when she says fancy, because Virgo doesn't tend to be fancy. They tend to be humble, straightforward, and functional. But the other thing is when she says, I feel unworthy, because, I do think Virgo is always looking up to an ideal, and they're humble. So that I thought was a very Virgo thing to say. Then here's more Virgo. I like feeling like an ox at the end of the day. I like working hard. It's continuously humbling to work hard, If you're humble and hardworking, opportunities will arise for you. So see, once again, here's a Virgo talking about humility and working hard. Those are 2 factors that we find with Virgo. Then Greta Garbo, who I think is kind of an iconic person who was known for carving out her privacy. She had Sun and Mercury in Virgo, but she also had a T-square, meaning, some confrontational challenges that involved that Sun, but also Pluto and Uranus. So see, there was she probably was even more so in determining who would be in her life and who wouldn't, or what people knew about her, than even a typical Virgo because of those squares. And I like that and this is that picky perfectionist. I never said I want to be alone. I only said I want to be let alone. There's a big difference. So, there again, she's being a teacher. She's being picky. She's, delineating the meaning of those words. But here's one too. She said, I'm not always sincere. One can't be in this world, you know? So there again, Virgo's acknowledgement that this isn't a perfect world. This is a flawed world. But you know, she also said, I wish I were supernaturally strong so I could put right everything that is wrong. You see, there again, idealism. I want to make things okay, but I know that I can't. She also said, there are many things in your heart you can never tell to another person. They're you, your private joys and sorrows, and you could never tell them. You cheapen yourself, the inside of yourself, when you tell them. Now, that I do think is a result not only of that Virgo sun, but of those squares, you know. Then, if you remember the actor Alex O'Loughlin, who was on Hawaii Five-O, and he did another series about vampires, Moonlight, I think it was called. He has Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars in Virgo. So once again, really, really strong Virgo energy. And a couple things he said, losing my anonymity is something that I find terrifying. He also has a quote about how much he loves to do charity. He also said, I write music, but just for me. I'm certainly not good enough to do it on any kind of a level, but I enjoy that time because it's quiet. So see, those seem like very Virgo things to say. Upton Sinclair. Now, do you guys remember who he was? He was actually a novelist, journalist, but very much of a political activist. But a lot of us may remember him because he wrote the book, The Jungle, which is one of those books that I think in a lot of, it used to be true that that was kind of required reading, either in like 8th grade or junior high or high school or something. And it's where, you know, he did all these kind of undercover things, you know, he went undercover, and worked in a Chicago meat packing plant. Now, here again, we're talking years ago. We're talking early part of the last century. And so when he was researching the jungle, that's what he did. He worked undercover for 7 weeks, but then he comes out with this like unbelievably progressive, expose on what it was like to be in one of those plants. And it just had kind of a forever indelible mark it left with people and in their minds about what was really going on. Now, what he said that I think is interesting, and by the way, that's not the only thing he was an incredible political activist. He was into all kinds of things, usually exposing behavior that other people weren't willing to look at or didn't see, just didn't know what was even going on. But he said, and this I'm sure he said about the jungle because of the meatpacking, he said, I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, I hit them in the stomach. So I thought that was an interesting thing. Okay, now here's Stephen King, Sun in Virgo, but he also has a smattering of planets in Libra and Scorpio, which makes perfect sense to me because of the kinds of things he writes. But here he's being very pragmatic. Talent is cheaper than table salt. What separates the talented individual from the successful one is a lot of hard work. See, Virgo is proud, very much in a sense like Capricorn. They're proud of being hard workers. They see that as a good thing. It's not like, how can I get by? How can I do the least amount of work and still get paid for it? How can I, and I'm not saying that they're not people who would make money in the stock market. They're not going to have passive income. I'm just saying they want to work. They want to live up to an ideal. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. So that's what he said. He said also the truth is in the details. And here again, that's a very Virgo thing, those details. So here, the last one I've got is Lily Tomlin. And I will admit, she's always somewhat of a surprise to me as being a Virgo, although in some ways I feel like, if she's not right on stage or in a show, you don't hear a lot about her personal life, right? So that is very Virgo. Sun, Mercury, and Neptune in Virgo. And with her quotes, sometimes it's a little bit hard because there's a lot of quotes that are attributed to her, but she actually co-wrote with Jane Wagner. So sometimes I'm not sure if this is, does she really get full credit? But that's who gets credited with most of these quotes, even though it was definitely a collaborative effort. And so some of these things, no doubt, came out of the mind, or at least out of that collaborative effort. But here are some things that Lily Tomlin said that I love. Reality is the leading cause of stress among those who are in touch with it. So once again, Virgo somehow has their finger on the pulse of, this is a flawed world. And, we've got to find a way to live in it. Lily said, I said, somebody should do something about that. Then I realized I am somebody. She said, the best mind-altering drug is the truth. That sounds like a Virgo. And then she also said, now this is interesting, sometimes I worry about being a success in a mediocre world. And she said, I can handle reality in small doses, but as a lifestyle, it's much too confining. Now that is Virgo. That is Estrella. Reality is just too confining. All right. So we are at the end of the show, and it just is a review. This is the time. Learn something new. Develop your expertise, or just get back into something that you really want to know and you want to do it well. This is about mastering something, mastering a field of knowledge or a skill or an ability. And remember, Virgo is at her best. She's a genius of defining personal and private space, while alternately being among the best of those who are in service in the world. Find a way to do that. Find your own balance. Virgo dances between her private world and her public persona of service. So I say set some goals and work your plan while the sun is in Virgo through September 22nd. All right, now coming up on next week's show, we will be looking at the week ahead, which does include Mercury, the planet that rules Virgo, moving into Virgo. That's going to happen on Tuesday, August 25th. But also, we have the next lunar eclipse. Those eclipses, they always come in sets, in pairs. Sometimes there's actually 3 in a row. This time there's 2. So we had that solar eclipse a week ago. We're now kind of in that valley, getting messages and acclimating and absorbing information. But the full moon lunar eclipse is next Thursday on August 27th. So not this Thursday, but August 27th is the lunar eclipse. So on next week's show, we will be talking about that. That will be at 5 Pisces if you want to look at your chart. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your remarks in the chat room. I really appreciate, seeing what you're thinking, and we're going to continue to try to focus on that a little bit more so that the show can be a little more interactive. So thank you for joining me over there. And thanks to everybody who listens to this later. I know everybody's not available in this time slot. So if you're listening to this later, thank you very much. Thanks to our producer, Serena. I would encourage you to stay tuned for Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone coming up next. She is live streaming on her channel, Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. Talk about something, you want to, learn something, develop your expertise. Listen to Kelly. She's always got some provocative information that she's channeling from really the true masters. All right. Well, here's the quote of the week. This is from Stephen King. Amateurs sit and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just get up and go to work. There again, functional, practical, pragmatic, sun in Virgo. So thank you, Stephen King, for that. This is CA signing out. You can find me for personal sessions on 12listen.com. Please feel free to request a scheduled call at a time that's good for you, because truly I am more available than it may look like on the site. But if you know there's a time that you really want to talk, just get on there and request a scheduled call. And we can even change it around a little bit. We'll find a time that we can talk. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology, live streaming here on YouTube, where we are changing the way we think about and embrace Virgo